esteemed European elites, representatives of EU media and the non-profit sector, honored, dedicated politicians who unwaveringly share our European values and stand on the only correct side of history, on the side of diversity, openness, progress, and sustainability. Together, we support the diversity of the LGBT community, an open migration policy, armament, and the transformation of Europe through our indisputable scientific ideology called the Green Deal. All of you, whose social standing and financial stability are firmly linked to these values, form the fundamental pillar of our magnificent European project. Allow me to remind you of a few principles that are key to preserving and developing our shared future within the European empire, called the European Union. We rely on the results of sophisticated studies in European behavioral psychology. We also have experiences from the last century, which stem from building our first European empire under German leadership. These tools enable us to effectively manage public opinion and shape citizens' attitudes across the entire continent. To create a devoted group of people who will support you unconditionally and uphold only one European value, you must offer them something. You must give them meaning, identity, uniqueness, bind them with benefits, intoxicate them with a sense of importance, and convince them that they represent the moral and intellectual pinnacle of society. Turn them into the European elite, but do not forget that they also need an enemy. To stand unwaveringly with us, they must believe that everything outside our sphere of values is a threat. Everything that is different, free, or ordinary must become the target of suspicion, contempt, or hatred. We must show them the culprit, the enemy they can blame for their frustration, whom they can hate, humiliate, and also punish. Only then will they belong to us. Only then will they defend our European rules as their faith. We are starting in schools. Our goal is to have students who, under normal circumstances, would never manage traditional university studies. Therefore, we have created dozens of new courses for European disciplines. These schools prepare our new Europeans in the right way of thinking and instill in them our new ideologies, the so-called European values. Thanks to this, they can obtain academic degrees that will open the way to strategic elite positions in European institutions, non-governmental organizations, and reputable media. Our aim is to target voters with a tendency towards snobbery, people who are not genuinely educated, do not know history, and whose interests are often superficial. It is not difficult to persuade such a group that voting for anyone other than us, with the right opinions on our side, is socially unacceptable and shameful. They must be repeatedly told that anyone who does not share our only correct European stance is a backward, a fool, and an enemy. This principle has always worked. People burned witches and believed they were doing good. It is the same crowd mentality, and we know how to exploit it. And that is precisely why we do it. The principle of our democracy and our European freedom is based on the so-called principle of delineation, or, if you prefer, on defining the boundaries of European values. Here I present a brief bullet-point process that each of us must constantly keep in mind, and its application is our duty, especially in the media. Defining the democratic boundary. We define ourselves what is democratic and what is not. Anything outside this boundary we set is automatically undemocratic, and towards such an entity, state, organization, or party, we do not need to behave democratically because it has been excluded from the democratic space. An example includes Slovakia, Hungary, of course Russia, and today also the USA. The same principle applies to opposition parties at home and abroad, or alternative media. With these entities, it is always necessary to use qualifiers such as undemocratic, populist, totalitarian, pro-Russian, extremist, left or right, or disinformation in the case of media. In short, everything outside the space we define is undemocratic, inhumane, and dangerous. Labeling individuals, the same principle applies to individuals. Anyone who is not part of the conscious European community must be identified and marked in time. As long as elections still exist, it is advisable not to label undecided voters. However, voters against systemic parties should be described as manipulated, foolish, or socially unsuccessful. For opposition politicians, we use terms such as dictator, pro-Russian, leader, undemocratic, extremist, populist, or disinformation agent. Dehonestization, mockery, exaggeration, and labeling. A very effective tactic, especially against non-European elements, opposition, but also against states, is the use of so-called labels, nicknames, and mockery. In television debates, it is enough to point out a minor mistake or inaccuracy in expression to easily divert attention from an uncomfortable topic that we want to avoid. In the case of states that oppose our values, we mainly highlight reports that damage the image of these countries. That is, any demonstration in Hungary, an unfavorable economic downturn in Slovakia or Serbia. Mistakes made by the Russian army on the battlefield are also welcome material for its discrediting and weakening its perception by the public. This form of communication is highly effective and widely understandable, especially with the support of our European media environment. Criminalization, attacks, and intimidation. This practice has proven itself many times. Leaders like Trump, the pro-Russian politician Fico, who was shot, the accused Okamura, the criminally prosecuted Babiš, or the pro-Russian Orban all have experience with it. Interrogations, pressure, creating cases, all of this worked and still does. It is not necessary to have evidence or to see cases through to the end. It is enough to arouse suspicion before elections, dust off an old case, or file a criminal complaint. This weakens or eliminates problematic candidates. Truth. Let us seek the truth, dear Europeans, exclusively within our European institutions. Any other source of information must be questioned and marked as disinformation or unverified. We have our own media and a sufficient number of non-profit and therefore independent organizations that verify and confirm the truth only if it aligns with European values. If information appears that can no longer be justified, there are two solutions for us. First approach. We utilize what the Ukrainian president has taught us. For example, the claim that Russia itself destroyed the Nord Stream gas pipeline, or that a Russian missile, even if Ukrainian, hit Poland, or that Russia is shelling a nuclear power plant it controls. We present this information as unverified and label any dissemination of it as spreading the Russian narrative. Second approach. When it comes to older topics, such as the consequences of the migration crisis in the EU or the effects of vaccines, and these consequences are already known, then these topics should be completely avoided and simply eliminated, as their dissemination could be exploited against our values. Elections. We are continuously addressing the issue of elections. Ideally, these would be selective elections, only for aware Europeans. This is not yet feasible, so we are considering these options. Lowering the voting age for students influenced by our European schools. Restricting voting rights for older citizens who are familiar with totalitarian regimes and tend to compare today's EU governance with past regimes, thereby confusing the younger generation. An effective tool we already use is postal voting. It can be regulated and serves as a safeguard of liberal democracy against opposition threats. Furthermore, it is necessary to exert pressure on social media operators and coordinate cooperation with European politicians or judges appointed by them. Campaigns against our European values should be summarized under the term Russian influence and approached accordingly. This was a brief guide on how to protect our great liberal democracy and how to demonstrate that even seemingly undemocratic and illiberal practices can, if properly presented and interpreted, be seen as European, correct, and democratic. Thank you for your attention. Glory to our European values.